a special education teacher and weightlifting coach at Hawthorne High School. He holds a BA degree in theater arts from Santa Clara. He's a quintessential volunteer. He volunteers for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing program in Catholic Big Brothers in the Los Angeles area. He volunteers for the Los Angeles County Juvenile Detention System. Because he has a hearing disorder, he volunteers to help boys and he mentors them who have learning difficulties. Every weekend he works in juvenile halls and youth detention centers throughout his community. In 1989, the County Marin named Mike Boulder Probation Volunteer of the Year. More recently, he was honored as National Philanthropy Day in Los Angeles, where he received the 1998 Outstanding Volunteer Service Award. He received a presentation from former President George Bush on the Points of Light Foundation in 1999. Also in 1999, Catholic Big Brothers named him Big Brother of the Year. And in the year 2000, he was named National Big Brother of the Year. He needs no further introduction, Mike Boulder.
Here this morning. Life has a funny way of putting us places we never thought we'd be, and National Big Brother of the Year is one of those places. Growing up in San Rafael, I planned on being an astronaut. I love the space program, and for me as a kid, the future was space exploration. Unfortunately, in high school, I found out how much mathematics was involved, and that dream kind of died a painful death. But I also liked filmmaking, and I thought I'd go down to Los Angeles for graduate school and make movies. But I'm also not very good at looking needs in the face and ignoring them, and I happened to see there seemed to be a lot of kids down there who needed people. So I got involved first with the Catholic Big Brothers agency down there, and a little later with the detention ministry, the kids in the juvenile hall, the YMCA, and so on. And I've made low-budget films. Scripts have been written and kind of languished. Teaching high school came along to pay the bills, and kind of like George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life, the years have ticked by and I've never seemed to get on with my big plans. But I discovered something very important. The future was never out there in space at all, or even in the complex technology of filmmaking. It's been right there all along in the face of every kid I ever worked with. You know, each of the little brothers and all the kids who passed through the YMCA, the juvenile hall, Hawthorne High School. I've been seeing the future for years, but it needs help. Down at Catholic Big Brothers, we have on our website a catchphrase that says, "A child's friend when a father can't be." But that's too politically correct for me. It should read, "A child's friend when a father won't be," because that is the truth. Very few, if any, of the 200 boys on our waiting list, or all the thousands of boys in juvenile halls in the state, lost their father to death. Death they can actually handle somewhat, but abandonment, that burns like fire in their hearts and minds, and quite often will rage out of control against the world. As a teacher, I work with very low-functioning special education students. They'll never go to college. Most of them probably will not be able to get a job on their own. But every year we always read one book, a very simplified version of a classic that I read in high school. And I remember when I read it, I didn't like it, because it wasn't like any of the movies that had been made from it. It wasn't scary, and it didn't seem like it was a horror story. I'm talking about Frankenstein. And basically, in that book, Victor Frankenstein is a very arrogant young man from a wealthy family who has everything. He has loving parents, a beautiful fiancée, and a future in medicine. But he wanted more than that. He wanted to create a man in his own image without reckoning upon God. He spent years on the research, ignoring his family and his fiancée. He spent about 10 months actually putting together his vision of the perfect man, and then he gave it life. But as Victor looked upon this huge, inarticulate, misshapen creature sitting there staring at him, he suddenly realized this is not what he wanted at all. He no longer wanted what he had made. So he rejected it. He abandoned it. And the creature, alone and without even the knowledge of how to eat, was left to face a harsh, cold, and cruel world that scorned it, mocked it, beat it, hated it, tried to kill it. And as it grew and developed intellectually and morally, it learned how to scorn, how to mock, how to hate, how to seek revenge, how to kill. It became a monster. A monster who, in its rage at the treatment by its creator, destroyed everything Victor loved and more. When we finished reading this book, I asked my intellectually challenged kids who they think is more responsible for the death and the carnage, the monster or Victor. And they always pick Victor. And I asked why. And the answer is simple. Because Victor abandoned the creature when it was his job to teach it right from wrong. How to be nice, how to love. Those kids might not be college material, but they're pretty smart. There are very many more Victor Frankensteins in the world today than Mary Shelley could ever have imagined. And after having spent so many years of my life with hundreds of their abandoned creations, I now understand why that book is a horror story. Monsters are not born. They're made, slowly and over time, by exposure to monstrous behaviors and little exposure to good ones, by neglect rather than attentiveness, by absence rather than presence. One of the oldest and most effective antidotes to this problem is Big Brother's program. My first little brother, Edgar, was 14 when I met him. He was very shy, with very poor self-image. His father and mother divorced when he was a baby, and his father wanted little to do with his son. Edgar lived in a bad neighborhood, gangs and drugs and poverty, and was not doing well in school. Like me, he was hard of hearing, but he would not wear his hearing aids. I tried to coax him into wearing them, but he was too embarrassed. He did notice, however, that every time we went out, I always wore my own. And one Saturday, I remember I picked him up, and he had on the hearing aids. And that was that. He always wore them from then on, I guess, simply because he'd been exposed to a man who was not embarrassed by such things. Edgar hated reading, but he knew how many books I had read and enjoyed. I gave him a few I thought he might like, and soon he was asking for more. He graduated high school despite a very serious bout with depression his senior year, but I stayed and helped him get through that. He's now 32 years old, and he's a computer programmer. Coming from that neighborhood, and that high school, Edgar could easily have become a monster. But instead, he's a good man. Matthew was 7, and I added him a few years later. Like Edgar, his parents divorced when he was a baby, and his father wanted little to do with his son. Matthew was also hard of hearing. I had been accustomed to Edgar, who was shy and uncertain. The day I met Matt, he was sitting on my lap within 5 minutes and showing everything to me in his room within 10. He showed me his drawings, his schoolwork, everything he'd ever done. Like all boys, he needed validation for those accomplishments from a man, because that's how boys, even the young ones, know they're on the right path toward becoming a man. I remember Matthew called me 3 or 4 times a week for the first few months, just to talk, but mostly to make sure I was still there, that I was not going to abandon him also. Matthew had a hard time in high school when his mother entered into a disastrous second marriage. It fractured the family, and Matthew spiraled downward for a time, failed some classes, flirted briefly with drugs, but I stayed with him. I hung in there, and he made it back into the light. And Mother got rid of the husband. At his high school reunion, Matt's mom hugged me and said, "We did it." Well, Matt will be 23 in May. He works at the YMCA with daycare children. He also volunteers at the YMCA with the Youth in Government program for high school kids. And he's in college classes to become a teacher. Matthew could have become a monster, but instead he's a very good young man. When Matt was about 12, I took on David, who was then 7. Where Edgar was shy and Matthew was outgoing, David was a whirlwind of energy, a Tasmanian devil who managed to be in 3 places at once. It literally took the efforts of Matt and myself and Edgar just to not lose him. David was also hard of hearing. And again, his parents had split up when he was a baby, but this time his father left the country and never saw his son again. He went to live with relatives in Italy and only spoke with David 2 or 3 times before he died about 5 years ago. David shed a few tears, but not many. How can you cry for someone you never even knew? The tears were really for himself because he did not know his dad, and like all boys, he wanted to. Even more than Edgar or Matt, David walked a very fine line between human being and Victor's monster. Fascinated by the dark side of human nature, he grew up watching pop culture celebrate as heroes the likes of Tupac Shakur and Snoop Doggy Dogg and Eminem and Marilyn Manson, to name but a few. He was fascinated by gang culture. He had already been kicked out of several school and summer programs before the age of 6 because of his callous disregard for people's feelings. His mother and his grandparents looked to me to pull him out of this abyss, and it has not been easy. It's been a long and hard-fought battle. Edgar helped and Matt. But I think we won. At last year's National Big Brother Convention, David told the crowd that thanks to me, he had become a real human being. He had learned empathy for others. And empathy is what separates monsters from the rest of us. David just turned 18 in March, will graduate high school in June and go on to college. He too has begun to see the future by volunteering with the little boys that are on our waiting list, those hungry for the big brother they may never get. David could very easily have become a monster, but he didn't. He got what he needed. He's a good young man. My fourth was Robert, and I actually met him through the detention ministry work. I had previously worked with Robert's younger brother, also named David, coincidentally, while David was in juvenile hall before he went home. Robert was housed at another probation facility that I also visited and had introduced himself to me as David's brother. Of the two of them, David was the more likable. Robert was very hardened and street-toughened by years in the gang and exposure to violence and death, moral emptiness, drug use. One day when I went to that facility, I saw Robert crying, and I remember being surprised. He never seemed the type who could cry. He always seemed a monster in the making. When I sat with him and asked him what was wrong, Robert told me through his tears that his younger brother, then 13, had taken a gun into the bathroom of their apartment and blown his head off. And he had left behind no reason why. When I went to David's funeral, and there was no one there but his mother and her friend, I began to have some idea maybe why. But Robert was angry and bitter. It should have been him, he said. He was the bad kid. He was the gang member. He was the one with all the bad friends. David was the good one. David was just trying to copy his older brother by being something he wasn't. One thing I have learned, if boys don't have a good role model, they will find a bad one. And Robert was angry at his mother for not stopping David, even for driving their father away years ago, even though the father was an abusive drunk. He used to beat up the little boys whenever he got a chance. The probation department released Robert about 2 months after David's suicide, gave him no counseling for him or his mom. As is their custom, they ordered Robert to stay away from all gang members and drug dealers, and then forced him to attend a probation school at which everyone was a gang member and a drug dealer. Robert's mom asked me if Catholic Big Brothers could help, and I told her I would look into it. Well, the agency immediately agreed to take Robert under the circumstances, but I would have to be the big brother because there was simply no one else available. So I took on Robert and done what I could to try to erase all the years of moral degradation and gang programming, but it maybe was a little bit too little too late. He was scheduled to attend that national conference with myself and the other boys last summer, but got arrested again shortly before that. Mostly violations of his probation, but enough to get him a stay in California Youth Authority. He could do as much as 7 years there. And despite a psych report that insisted Robert needed counseling, still to deal with guilt over the death of his brother, nothing was done. He currently languishes in perhaps the worst youth authority facility in Chino, trying not to get caught up in the riots and the violence. In his records, it shows Robert's deterioration began in the 3rd grade. Nothing was done. I wonder how might his life have been different, or that of his brother, if they had gotten big brothers back then. Is Robert a monster? Not yet. But that system will do all it can to make him one. On his 18th birthday this past January, Robert called and left a message on my machine at home. The place was on lockdown because of a riot, but a decent staff member allowed him to use the telephone. He told my answering machine that it was his birthday, and he hated having it in that place. But he thanked me for the card I had sent. He thanked me for the time I had given him, for listening to him, for understanding him. His voice cracked a few times, but he didn't quite cry. There's still hope, but that system may yet take it away. Monsters are not born, they're made, slowly and over time. A boy needs a good man to show him how to become one. A boy needs a good man to validate his positive achievements, to spend time with him, listen to him, love him. All the money and all the government programs in the world mean nothing. A boy knows the difference between someone paid to spend time with him and someone who simply wants to. Through my years in the detention facilities, I've met many monsters. Some of their crimes have been horrific. Like all boys, like Victor's creation, they had a great need growing up and it wasn't met. But when I show them I care, I give them even a smidgen of love. These monsters, like Victor's, return it tenfold. But what is our solution? We pass laws, like Proposition 21, to throw them away into adult prisons, out of sight and out of mind. But why aren't they created? Why aren't the victors of this world in the prison cells right next to them? Why do we only hold the creation accountable and not, as my class at school would advocate, the Creator as well? Good men can change this. Every one of those boys in juvenile hall, if he'd been given a role model, a real mentor, a big brother, might at least have had a fighting chance in this harsh and creative world. The most monstrous child I ever met was a tiny little boy, 14-year-old named Ramon, who had shot another kid 3 times to take a backpack he admitted he never wanted. He simply wanted to find out what it was like to kill somebody. Ramon had an annoying habit of giggling during his court proceeding, especially when the psychiatrist publicly declared him to be a sociopath, a monster. I didn't know any of that when I met Ramon in the high-risk offender unit at juvenile hall, but he was only too happy to tell me. In fact, his only regret was that his victim survived and could testify against him. At that first meeting, I found a very hollow boy who cared for no one in his life. Mother, sister, girlfriend even. If they'd been murdered that very day, he told me, he could not have cared less. And as if his words were not chilling enough, they were delivered in an empty, dispassionate tone of voice, punctuated by that very creepy giggle. Made me think I was talking to a teenage Hannibal Lecter. And yet, I sensed something in him, something deep down between the lines. So I kept going back week after week and spent some time, just with him, an hour at most. We talked about his alienation from his mother, long absent father, drug use, gang affiliations, disassociation from friendship or love. When we talked about real feelings, it was usually about mine, since he appeared to have none. I'm not a psych, there was no psychobabble going on, just a lot of listening and consistent presence. Well, his case dragged on for over a year. He was finally convicted as a juvenile to 10 years in youth authority. He was now 15. As the day approached when Ramon would leave juvenile hall, I noticed an uncertainty about him I'd never seen before, kind of skittishness. Even that giggle had lost its edge. I told Kathy, the only other volunteer in that unit who had spent much time with him, that I thought it was because Ramon was going to miss us, that we had touched something in him. She flat out said, "No way." I also told her that he said he would write to us when he got to YA. And again she said, "No, he doesn't care enough." Well, about 7 months went by and I began to think she was right. Then out of the blue we got a letter, addressed simply Mike and Kathy. Ramon didn't even know our last name. It was a short little note. "Hi, it's me, Ramon, writing to you from YA. Just want to let you know I'm not getting into too much trouble." He signed it, drew a little picture. But underneath all of that, larger than the rest, he had written "I," then drew a little heart, then the letter U, then people. I love you. I remember, I think my heart skipped a beat when I saw that. Because love was a word I had never heard pass that boy's lips in over a year. In fact, those psychs would probably have said it would never pass his lips, unless it was in the context of "I love to hate." In fact, maybe the word was so foreign to Ramon he had to draw a little heart instead. The emotion was there. It had touched him after that. In later letters to me, he asked, "Why did you keep coming back and spending time with me when everyone else gave up?" And I told him, because I sensed something good in him. I saw within him the real human being. Because I saw in him, deep down, the face of God. He never stopped thanking me for believing in him when no one else did. And he changed. He began to excel at every program YA threw at him. He even established a good relationship with his mother and sent me a photograph of himself wearing his cap and gown, hugging his mom, waving his high school diploma. While still within that facility, they allowed him to go out and take his SAT exam for college. He applied and was accepted to Cal State Northridge upon his release. Well, they released him early, and he just turned 22 last month. He's currently enrolled at the university to become a pharmacist, which I thought was a little ironic. I guess after all those years of playing with drugs, he decided he wanted to get paid for it. But he's doing well. And he attributes his redemption to the simple fact that I kept coming back. Because as he told me, it made him realize that there must have been something in him worth coming back to. 1 hour a week, freely given, costing nothing, helped transform a bona fide monster back into a human being. Nobody can tell me this big brother idea doesn't work because I know better. It's about presence, freely, consistently given. One man giving a few hours a week to one boy, believing in that boy, helping him believe in himself. It works, especially when that boy passes on what he's become to another. That's how to build a future. So why then are there still so many monsters and would-be monsters running the streets today? Because there are not enough men willing to be present, to give those few crucial hours. And when one of these monsters detonates, and we have yet another Columbine or Santee, everyone will wring their hands and shake their heads and ask why. I believe I could give them many reasons why. If Victor's creature were here today, it could tell them why. And so I dare say could remind them. But this is why I have hope. And I myself will take on another little brother this year. In fact, my caseworker is trying to sell me on a pair of them. 2 brothers that she said could really use me. And so it goes. Unlike the Marines, who only need a few good men, Big Brothers needs a lot of good men. I no longer need to look into space to find the future. And neither do any of you. It is here, right now, all around us, before our very eyes. I, for one, feel truly blessed to be part